So, I notice many of you could get into this quiet zone. What are the elements that got you there, or got us there? The interesting thing is that a lot of what brought us peace in meditation will probably work in a lot of our day-to-day relationships. You know how relationships, this idea, the word, the concept, relationship talks about how we relate to people and how we relate to things and how we relate to each other. I looked it up in the Buddhist text, the Nikayas, and I found there's not actually a lot of discussion about relationships. And I was wondering why, and I asked around and said, Ajahn, and I asked some other people, do you recall any suttas that actually spoke about relationships specifically? And most of us couldn't come up with anything spot on. It's in the periphery. And after that, I started thinking, is it possible that the Buddha didn't talk about relationships? And of course, the answer then is, a big part of the Dhamma is about how to maintain good relationships. That's what all the precepts are all about. Whatever that is conducive to the Eightfold Path, to the ending of suffering, is conducive to relationships. So, okay, I want to talk about this subject of relationships because of a few observations that started from end of last year. End of last year, I was talking to a few people who comes to the monastery, and I asked them, so how are you celebrating Christmas this year? And the interesting thing was, there's a lot of anxieties and I don't know what other discomforts around this period leading up to Christmas Day. I honestly didn't see this before coming to the monastery. In all my 50 years prior to coming to the monastery, I always enjoyed my Chinese New Year. It was the happiest time of the year. We cousins and uncles and aunties would all get together and we'll have a reunion dinner and exchange stories about what happened the last year and stuff like that. But here in the monastery, I realized about half the people have such experiences and the other half not so. And of course, since Christmas there was New Year, since New Year there was Chinese New Year, since Chinese New Year there was Valentine's Day, and now we are here in the beginning of March. In the process, I've done some teachings in Malaysia, and people have come up and asked me questions about their so-called personal issues. By and large, all the questions revolve around relationships. And then I started thinking about it again because Ajahn Brahmali asked me to give this talk on this Friday evening. Then I realized something else. A big part of our hopes for happiness is hinged on relationships. We look for a significant partner. We build a family with that partner and have children. And we hope and wish we invest a lot of time and energy and money, resources, hoping that these relationships bring us happiness. I imagine that's the whole motivation for the whole exercise. People have been doing it for generations, from Yeah, what do they do it for? It has to be happiness, right? Yet at the same time, that's not that's not the outcome that we see. A lot of times, it is the closest people who cause the most grief and the most anger, the most sadness, depression. Then I wonder again, wait, hang on. We know, we live in a capitalistic world. And in a capitalistic world, all the financial gurus and experts and wizards, they have all these wonderful tools and analysis method. They can tell you, all right, if the price of oil went up by so much, it would affect the economy in this way. If the taxes went up by so much, if the interest rate went up by so much, if the house prices went up by so much, they could analyze and predict stuff. Do we have any similar tools for relationships? Not really. Nobody ever talks about it. And then, okay, do we even talk about this in schools? No, interestingly, no. But once upon a time, long, long ago, like when I was a teenager, my parents used to subscribe to the Reader's Digest. And I always found that most interesting part of the Reader's Digest wasn't the articles, but the little snippets at the end of the space fillers before the start of the next page. And I remember one distinctly, and it says this: 80% of your future happiness depends on who you choose as your partner. Does that make sense? As a teenager about to start dating, I started to struggle with that. Really, 80% of my happiness depends on one decision. Yeah, it struck me then, and then I decided I have to be a bit careful about this decision. I also looked at, of course, at my parents. I looked at other people around me, and I started looking at who gets along best, who quarrels, who is happy, who is not. You may have heard me ask the questions before, why we get most angry at the people closest to us. And somehow we do have that habit. We allow ourselves to get most upset at the people we care about most. So, okay, so here's the thing. As a Buddhist monk, there is actually a rule for us to say, okay, as a monk, you don't go around matchmaking people, you don't go and promote new relationships. You don't introduce somebody's daughter to somebody's son and say, it's apparently a serious Sangha Disesa. That's the second tier of the most serious offenses if we try to do something like that. So this talk is not geared towards encouraging you to start a new relationship. But if you are already in a relationship, and we all are, because by nature of us having parents, by nature of us having friends and colleagues and siblings, and you may have a partner and children, the question is then, what do we do with these relationships in a way that bring us those happiness without bringing us the grief? Okay, so here's a question. With another person that you have a relationship with, the Buddha talks about three doors of action: the mind door, the mouth door, speech door, and the body door. Whether you interact through body, speech, or mind. Which one do you think is most important with relationships? Yeah, this day and age, especially in a Buddhist circle, people who come sit in this hall, domestic violence is probably not an issue. I don't know, but I'm guessing. Speech probably hurts a lot of people. I think a lot of us who don't go back for Christmas or who don't make those phone calls is because of some speech that happened in the past that have cut very deep and we haven't let go. And then of course there's the mind door. The mind door is not something that you transact from one person to another in a direct way, but it shows up in the manner of your speech, right? So, which is why, as Bill was saying earlier, on Sunday, I like to do a sutta class on various suttas to do with right speech, how we talk to one another. What are the elements that the Buddha considered important when we talk to one another? But here, I'd like to raise the idea of the mind door. A lot of times when we talk to one another, it's not so much the words that are important, I think. Because of the underlying perception of the other person, for example, if I thought my fellow monk here on my right is somebody close and dear to me, somebody who's conscientious, who will look after me when I'm sick, who will get me my food when I'm unable. He is such a monk. So I will hold him near and dear, and I will speak to him in a respectful way, right? So underlying that speech is my perception of what this person is like. If, on the other hand, I thought, well, this person is selfish, this person is uncooperative, this person just wants to argue and for argument's sake, then I would decide, I don't really want to talk to this person, I probably won't depend on this person for my food, I'll probably go hungry if I did. And so then the quality of that relationship drops. So here's what I invite you to do. The nearest, dearest persons in your life, how do you perceive them? Are they friends? Are they kind? Are they bloody useless? Because the way you perceive them colors the way you talk to them. And the way you talk to them then colors your relationship. So, the Buddha always said, well, the right mind state is the 4 Brahma viharas. You have heard this before: loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, rejoicing in somebody's success and happiness, as well as equanimity. So, if I recognize this friend as being somebody on the same journey, we share the same path, we go through similar struggles, then if I consider him a friend, I would try and help him along, knowing that he will help me along. So we have metta. And then if I should see him, a sprained ankle or whatever, and I would say, well, what can I do to help? Can I get you the food? Can I get you a bandage? Can I get you a walking stick? And that effort to help is perceived very kindly as friendship. Or if he should be declared the monk of the month in Bodhinyana and I rejoice, rather than say, how come he got it and I didn't get it? then again the friendship is there, rather than you don't erode the friendship. And sometimes you have to use equanimity, and this one I like to suggest you to see if it applies to some of your relationships. There are times when the other person is somebody near and dear, and somebody you don't get to choose whether you want to have a relationship with or not. Typically, this means family members or bosses or colleagues that you're stuck with. You can't say, I don't want to have this relationship with this person. If you could understand sometimes what the other person is going through in terms of difficulties in life, you would forgive them for their imperfection a bit more easily. To start, I think we should all recognize that none of us are perfect. People even get upset with Ajahn Brahm, so what more the rest of us? So, this getting upset with one another mostly happens because we don't get what we want. The other person didn't give us what we want. And therefore we feel the other person owes us, the other person has been unfair, unkind, and we deserve this right to be angry in order to get what we want. But if you understood the motivation of the other person, why he or she couldn't give you what you wanted, why he or she does not have the ability to grant you your wish, then there is less animosity towards that person. You just say, well, if I want $1 million from this monk and he's not giving me, I can understand why. You won't get upset with him for his failing. And often, looking at what happened, the conversations I had before in the run-up to Christmas, and sometimes wonder whether that's the kind of situations. There are family members, in the past we've had experiences with them, and I don't know, after the turkey has been served, after the glass of wine has been drunk, and then the conversations turn ugly, and then you start wondering, why did I come here again this year? And perhaps the next year I'll never come back again. Question, do your fellow siblings or family members have the ability to interact differently? Quite often they are conditioned during their childhood, just as you've been conditioned during your childhood, to react in certain ways. And you have had role models who react to those same situations, probably in the similar way. And then you come to some place like the BSWA, the Buddhist temple, and you hear the Buddha's teachings, and he says, well, there is another way to interact. You understand what's going on, you understand the motivations. The motivations quite often are driven by the three roots: greed, anger, and delusion. Many of us, all of us, believe our happiness is in getting what we want. So we struggle to make the other person give us what we want. And quite often, we don't have any other tools except to express it through anger. Here's another suggestion. How about learning some conversational skills? learn to speak like a sincere salesman. As in, before you react to a no with anger, you think about, what's behind the no that he just said? What's the motivation? What is he resisting? What is it that he wants and is not getting and therefore says no? When you analyze like that, you quite often get to the real motivations underlying those conversations. As I pointed out before, quite often we have superficial arguments over inconsequential things just so that you win. Just to prove a point, I'm better than you and you're not treating me kind. But you don't actually resolve what is it that you disagree with, what is it that is bothering you. So, I'll give some examples. There's this case where a mother is very concerned. Okay, so this mother is here in Perth. She's not a local. She married an Australian and came here and has got one son. The husband is substantially older. The son is a teenager. The husband has suffered a heart attack already and has recovered, and he's a nice jovial guy, and he seems to be living a happy life towards his old age. But this wife has got a fear of being left alone here in Perth when the husband passes away. So she is harboring all her hopes on her teenage son to keep her company into her own old age. Only problem was, this son didn't behave in a manner that was promising. The son had an addiction problem. So what happens? The mother says, okay, I need a good son. I can't have a son who's got an addiction problem. Then what happens when the old man dies? I'll be left all... She is practically in panic. And this kind of panic is not a short-term event. It's a few months, years. And she just sees the train crash coming. Tries very hard to talk to the son to solve the addiction problem, but fails. And the harder she tries, the more the son pulls away into his addiction. And you wonder why. And this was explained to me by somebody who's done a lot of work for himself. He says, while the mother is having that fear and panic about being left alone, that son is also having a fear about being abandoned. How can it be? The mother loves you so much and wants you to be next to her for her old age. But the experience of the son was, so long as the mother rejects him as not good enough because he's having depressions and other addiction problems, her rejection showed in the way she interacted with the son. And for the son's perspective, that rejection is painful. What do you do when you suffer such pains? You try to numb those pains by addiction. So, very often we kind of drop into a or B answer, okay, I got to force him to abandon his addiction, or I won't love him. Or if he abandons his addiction problem, then I can love him. But as you can see, it's a catch-22. It won't solve that problem because it's conditional love. It's conditioned, premised on you give me what I want, then I give you love. And I've seen that in so many cases now. There's another case of a gambling addiction. The father apparently is a very kind and generous man in the sense that he provides for all his kids' needs, all the material needs, but he was a very controlling person. Do it the way I told you to do it. Go to school by this path and not that path. Don't walk through that neighborhood, go by this neighborhood. And this son, later on, continued to work with the father in their family business. The way I understood it, the son never developed enough self-esteem, any self-confidence, always being told, you're not good enough. And the son, fortunately, not drug addiction, but I'm not sure if it's fortunate or not, but gambling addiction to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars. Why? Because he wanted to show to his father, I can make money. So that father will perceive me as, I'm not useless. So, so the message I would like to share is that, especially for near and dear family members, if possible, not to have love premised on conditions. As you've heard Ajahn also tell you stories about this little boy who wanted to grow a little bean sprout, and then the father gave him a few bean sprouts. He created a little container with water and soil and planted the bean sprout, and he waited, watered it every day. And then, lo and behold, after a week or so, a tiny little green shoot comes up, and he waters it again. And then the father says, no, not too much water, just enough to wet the soil. But the child is in a hurry. I want to see a bean sprout. And then the child looks at the bean sprout, the leaf is coming up. Maybe if I pull it, it will extend a bit longer and grow faster. And he tries so hard to make that bean sprout to the shape he wants. And in the end, pulls too hard and the leaf comes off, and that's the end of the bean sprout. The analogy here is that a lot of children and our relationships take time to grow, just like that bean sprout. You can't quite force it, and you can't quite make it grow exactly the shape you want it to grow. You give it the right conditions, and the right condition always means a safe environment where there's trust, there's kindness, there's mutual respect. And in that environment, whatever it is will grow. If you do have to say no, if you do have to reprimand, it is always done in a way that supports that growth. If it's done in a way that reinforces the pride and ego of the person reprimanding, quite often it does damage. The kind of damage I've seen supports recent studies that seems to say if a child has to go through a lot of repetitive reprimands, repetitive put-downs, repetitive criticisms, they eventually adopt that mental habit of thinking, I'm not good enough, I'm useless, I don't have confidence, or even father doesn't love me, mother doesn't love me. When those thoughts get ingrained in the mind, it colors the person's life for the rest of his life. I was saying to some people about several studies. One of them is called the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, and they found that you know how in the past, in the early days, medical studies would say, okay, what's the risk of smoking versus cancer? What's the risk of three eggs a day versus cancer or heart cholesterol? What's the effect of 3 coffees a day versus no coffee? And then this study came along and says, well, you know what? A lot of our bad habits, whether it's alcohol, drugs, whether it's mood swings, whether it's depression, whether it's anger, all goes back to childhood. They could point out that, for example, diabetes, heart attacks had a stronger correlation with your childhood experience than the number of eggs you took. Your risk of depression, suicide, your risk of mental health issues is stronger correlated to your childhood than other environmental risk factors. Your risk of being an alcoholic or a drug addict or a gambler they even say things like marriage failures, they say things like taking part in risky behaviors, tied to a lot of whether you suffered in childhood, whether through a single trauma of abandonment, for example, or more likely continuous strife, continuous difficulty, being abused, being neglected. So, I guess what I'm trying to say now is 2 things. One, if you're a parent, there are implications in the way we interact with them that may either boost their self-confidence and their exploration and their calmness of mind, their sweetness of their behavior, and there's also interactions that will create a lot of negativity in their minds. And the next thing I want to say is that a lot of times where we are as adults, we are also carrying a lot of those scars from our childhood. But don't blame your parents. Question is the idea being that they too probably carry a lot of scars from their parents or their growing up. It's only 2 generations ago that we had World War II, so they had a far more difficult time than we do today. Question then, okay, when you do interact with your parents and if you have got difficulties, what do you do? If so happens, you're lucky enough that you, your family, your parents, your spouse, partner, children, also attend BSWA talks and listen to these good stories, there's a chance that you can have a family meeting and say, all right, let's do something about this family and the relationships between these family, and do it as a project, do it as a family exercise. Because by and large, every one of us want a nice family. Good news about that teenager with the addiction problem. Eventually the mother understood what I was trying to tell her. And she said, all right, change plan, wrong tool. We can't reject him because of his addiction. So embrace the son, allowed him to be comfortable at home. The son has since taken on taking care of several fish tanks, started a bonsai hobby at home, because the home now feels comfortable, feels pleasant. He no longer needs to escape the home and go to a friend's house, a den elsewhere, and numb himself. There's a more pleasant thing to do. If you are a meditator, you will know this. When that meditation space is nice and pleasant, the mind stays. The mind wants to be there. It feels good. If you just had a bad day at work and you had some screaming clientele and you go back feeling, the world is so unfair, your mind won't stay in the head space. The mind will jump back to what he said. How can he say that? How can she say that? No. So long as it's uncomfortable, the mind will run. The mind stays when there's this nice, warm, friendly relationship space. Likewise, all your relationships, if the child, spouse, feels that the home is quite uncomfortable, tense, then of course that person would rather be elsewhere, just like your mind during a bad sit. But if that space at home is warm, cuddly, accepting, comfortable, why would anybody want to be anywhere else? Right? So yes, if only we could provide that space for everybody in our lives, then So, any questions, any suggestion, any comments? Yeah.
Venerable Radha,
Yes.
your talk tonight on relationship, the Buddha told us that attachment brings suffering. I repeat, attachment brings suffering. By saying that, I suppose he meant that things in Buddhism, things are impermanent. If you become too attached, too close, and then when you lose them, that's suffering. Am I right to say that it's okay to have that relationship of friendship, but don't become attached or too close?
Here's what I would suggest. If you are in the middle of bad relationships, your mind will not be at peace. So if you are already in a relationship, and as I said earlier, we all are in some form of relationship, whether it's with parents, with kids, with spouses, with colleagues, then having good relationships actually help you on the path, rather than if you had relationships that are ugly. So, on the other hand, yes, the Buddha also did say to let go of attachments eventually when you get to that point where letting go of attachments helps you along the path. So, as you know, it's called the gradual training for a reason. You don't try to do advanced grade stuff when you start primary school stuff. So, if those attachments or relationships hinder your progress, then you might want to minimize them, which is what then monastics do. But you still try not to make a mess out of those relationships that you have. Yeah.
So in personal relationship, we shouldn't be too close in it, knowing that we're going to lose them one day, you know. Not too much attachment.
The problem is with clinging. It's not with the relationship. It's the clinging and the understanding that is the problem. If you think that, okay, if I lose this person, my life is lost, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? If you have that, then of course losing a friend is very traumatic. But if you accept the Buddha's teaching, life is impermanent, people die, they will go eventually, and Ajahn Brahm will tell you stories about funerals. You have been there, you had the front row seat, you were right there listening to Ajahn Brahm every weekend. When he finally does go, do you think about, oh no, next week he won't be here anymore? Or would you say, oh, for the past 30 years I've been here in Perth, I got to hear all the stories every weekend? Which one would you say? So if you are the first one, of course, then to ask you to meditate again back then, it's going to be difficult. But if you say, yes, I've learned a lot from Ajahn Brahm, I was very blessed, and then you sit with gladness in your heart, it's different.
Thank you.
Okay. Any questions from the hall? I'll give you priority. Here's one question. In a world where connection is limited, what do you do when you don't have other people in your life at all? No friends, no family, no local Buddhists. Is it attachment I need to work on? As I was answering Eddie's question, it's if you are in the space like a lot of serious meditators who value solitude, then of course having solitude is the best thing in your life. If you're somebody like Ajahn Brahm, somebody gives you a cave and all you have to do is just walk down the hill and get your food and come back and sit back in the cave again, why not? But on the other hand, if you find yourself bored, find yourself lonely, then of course you crave for connection. So I'm not sure how to answer this question. What do you need to work on? Perhaps working on enjoying solitude. As we did early in the evening, there's a way where you can sit alone, mind, breath, and kindness. And it's very, very peaceful. No trouble, no quarrels, no cravings, no anger. Really peaceful. And if you do that long enough, Ajahn Brahm tells us there's bliss that's better than yeah, why not? Dear Ajahn, kindly give advice on how to stop comparing ourselves with others and how to be content with what we already have. You know, this question about comparing, it seems okay. You've heard Ajahn say this before. If you are not contented with what you have, if you keep looking for something else, you can't enjoy what you already have. So if you have a partner whom you think is not good enough, not pretty enough, not smart enough, not rich enough, not whatever enough, not kind enough, not adoring me enough, then you want something else, you can't enjoy this partner. So the idea of comparing and then looking for the next better thing, I too found it. This was engineer thinking way back. How? At what point in your life should you say, okay, stop checking out the market, stop dating, and pick that one person whom you choose to spend your life with? The assumption being that once you commit, there are joys and happinesses that you don't get as a casual dating person. And so as an engineer, you do the maths and you do an integration and say, all right, if you make your decision late in life, then you only have a short span of time, even though you think you might find a more perfect person. Or you start early in life, you might say, okay, this person is not perfect, but I have longer time to spend with this. After a while, it's like, do you actually make good decisions when you compare? A lot of times we compare based on one dimension without looking at another dimension. Do you compare thinking that money is most important, looks most important, kindness most important? And Ajahn has some very good marriage advice when he gives to newlywed couples who come to him for blessings. And he says, it's not so much what you start with, but what you make of it. And he gives very good advice on how to make the best of it. Quite often, when we have conversations or we have a relationship with somebody, after a while we think we know, and therefore we take for granted, and then we stop asking important questions about what is it that makes you happy, or what is it that makes you unhappy. And I realize many couples don't have those conversations. For example, one that Ajahn just gave earlier this week on Monday, a couple came to a monastery and said, we are getting married soon. And advice was, once a year on your anniversary day, pack the kids away with grandma or somebody, two of you sit down, exchange gifts, do a forgiveness ceremony for all the things that you know you have done wrong, as well as all the things which you may have inadvertently done wrong, and then have honest conversation about those things, making sure that those conversations are well intended for building up the relationship further, rather than to criticize. And then at the end of that, you would hope that, yes, you understand each other better, that you would support each other better. And in that way, you won't go looking elsewhere, because you start understanding that relationships take work, and you have invested a lot of time and effort and understanding into this one. To start all over again is like to burn a house and then try and buy another one. The house you have is probably pretty much good enough. It's just whether you upkeep it, maintain it. And that takes work. If it was a commercial decision, it was a real physical house, many of us would probably think about upgrading, remodeling and fixing leaks and stuff. But relationships, we tend to take it for granted and don't bother fixing. I wonder how whether or not you can have those conversations often enough to look for the leaks and then stop the leaks, look for the parts of the floor that needs replacing of carpets, look for the where you can put a new potted plant and make things more pleasant in a relationship sense. Anybody want to make a comment here? No? I'll continue with another question. Dear Ajahn, how do you avoid being exploited and taken advantage of if you are generous and kind? Even children leave parents alone when they grow old. How to trust? So yes, in modern lingo, we are talking about setting boundaries. In Buddhist lingo, it's about understanding. As I was saying earlier, a lot of our conversation starts from a view and a perspective. How I view my fellow monk, that's how I would color my speech. If I view my fellow monk or a person as somebody who likes to exploit me and take advantage of me, then I would learn to negotiate and agree what I want to offer. I understood this pretty early on in my life, that we are not unlimited in our resources, whether it's our patience or whether it's our bank account or whether it's our affection for somebody. We are not unlimited. We are all human. We all have our imperfections. Until you become an arahant, we still want to protect us versus them. So, understanding that, then you would try and understand how much the other person wants or needs, how much resources you have. If he demands for so much of my time, will it actually help him in a beneficial way? If it will, then, and if I care for him enough, then perhaps investing that amount of time is useful. Or I could say, well, yes, I hear your demands, but I don't think that's the best way to help. Then I might offer an alternative that says, well, I can do this much for you, I think it will help you better. I think perhaps you can get some of the other help from Centrelink, from Ajahn Brahm as our shared teacher. Or quite often the answer is not in A and B, yes or no. Quite often you can negotiate for a solution that gives that person what he needs within your own means. It may not be A or no. It can be C, D, E, or F. My suggestion, take the time to understand what the need is rather than just say no or yes. Take the time to understand why this person needs a new handphone, for example. Or a lot. If you can understand what's going on, then you can come up with actually useful solutions. Hi Van, my 5-year-old is experiencing separation anxiety. Since starting school this year, he has never left my side. We are now trying to introduce short periods of me being away, but my partner says I need to be away from home and not speak to him till he agrees to go to school. Is this the correct approach? He is stubborn, strong-willed 5-year-old. I'm not an expert. I did come across a study called the attachment theory. It's supported by that adverse childhood experience research. If children are neglected, if 5-year-olds, that's in that age group, if they're neglected for long enough, they do feel resentment, they do feel unloved, and they will develop self-protection habits which may be detrimental to their future lives. Beyond that, I don't have a solution specifically, I don't know enough. But not speaking to him until he goes to school doesn't sound like the right solution. I can't say much more. It seems to me that pleasures are not so pleasant as I expected, and pains are very much more painful. Should a person strive for happiness or freedom from pain? Should a person strive for happiness or freedom from pain? Okay, a few thoughts come to mind. One, there's this Professor John Gottman, and he is a researcher on relationships. So he says this, he will listen to the conversation in the next table at a restaurant, and he will predict for you, this couple, I think they'll survive. That couple, they'll break up before the end of the year. And apparently his accuracy was 90%. How did he do it? And he says this, if you look at two people interact, and you score them for how they interact with each other, if somebody says something and the other person supports, agrees, or is empathetic, score a +1. If that person criticizes, denounces, negates, cancels, criticizes, score a -1. So he says, if you get 5 pluses for every minus, that couple will survive, but with a C grade. They'll stay together. If the ratio is anywhere closer to 1 plus for every 1 minus, it won't last very long. The champions will do 20-1 or more. So it kind of fits in here. It says, should you pursue happiness or should you avoid pain? This guy has observed, it takes 5 units of pleasure to negate 1 unit of pain. And I think we are evolutionary theory seems to support that. If you're fearful of something, you really want to avoid it. But if you like something, chances are it won't pull you quite as hard. Which one should you do? Well, if you can, why not pursue both? On the other hand, the Buddhist explanation of happiness is actually lack of suffering. The whole Four Noble Truths says that if 1, there is suffering, 2, the suffering is caused by craving, 3, the ending of that craving leads to the end of your suffering. What it doesn't say is that ending of suffering is the highest happiness you can have. And of course, the Fourth Noble Truth says, if you want to pursue end of suffering or happiness, you do the Eightfold Path. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right endeavors, right mindfulness, and right samadhi. Okay, so that's all the questions online. Any last comments? Yes.
So, yeah, like you said that we have to try to understand another and forgive, but is there a line of like where you can tolerate? Like if you have to tolerate someone so much, like do you know where the line is, or like, if there's no violence or going on?
I'm not sure if I understood the question. So you're saying if you forgive, but you're not sure how where the division is. When do you stop forgiving and along those lines, right? So Ajahn, in his okay, this is not the wedding blessing counseling, but this is the how do you repair relationship counseling, and he says this. If after some kind of a transgression and you want to repair that relationship, first, of course, both parties must want to repair that relationship. Then, next thing is to re-establish trust. As you know, trust is one of the core foundations of any relationship. If you don't trust a person, if you don't respect that person, then that relationship becomes very one-sided or very, very transactional, very calculative. On the other hand, if you trust and respect that person, then chances are you actually support the other person in a non-calculative way, giving without expecting anything in return, as Ajahn calls it. But if the trust is broken, and you say, okay, I am hurt, I want to forgive you, I want this relationship, I want to repair this relationship, but we need to rebuild the trust. Then Ajahn says, there's this parole system that works very well. For the next however many months that you decide, 6 months maybe, that the person who had transgressed and wants forgiveness must own up, must allow himself, herself to be examined so that the trust is regained. How do you examine? That the phone is left unlocked, all the passwords are left available to the other person, and all this can be checked at any time. So that you open yourself to prove that you will try not to transgress again. I thought that made a lot of sense.
Thank you.
Okay. No last questions? Okay, very good. Shall we pay respects? Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddham Bhagavantam Abhivade Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sanghang Namami